Hi, I'm Nicole. Today I'm going to be talking about trauma. Trauma is a word that's been thrown around a lot recently. It's become increasingly popular in the mental health world. And the reality is, a lot of people have experienced some form of trauma in their life, but just might not be aware of it. Today I'd like to just go over the nuts and bolts and give everybody an understanding of what trauma entails. The first thing I'd like to do is have you think about how safe do you feel right now? You might notice yourself do a body scan. You might notice yourself start thinking in your head, what dangers are around me? On a scale of 0 to 10, how safe do you feel? If you said 10, great, you feel pretty safe. Most people will at least go down to 9 or 8. Some people will go all the way down to 5, 4, depending on their circumstance. The reality is, most people sitting watching a video are pretty safe. But some of the thoughts that come in might be, well, what if somebody comes and barges in the door? What if something catches on fire? What if a plane crashes and the building falls down? There's a lot of things that the brain might start scanning for to identify if you're safe or not. Your body sensations and your thoughts are good indicators of past experiences and memories that might be impacting your ability to feel safe in the moment. When people have experienced some form of trauma, their body and their thoughts don't feel safe all the time, even in situations where they're probably pretty safe. How many people have been in a parking garage and start to feel anxiety creep up? That's because we've been told a lot of our lives that parking garages aren't safe. Most people have not had a negative experience in a parking garage. However, they still feel a sense of danger when they're there. And that's because of training and things that we've gone through that make us believe that we're not safe in certain situations. So let's dive into what we do know about trauma. Trauma is something that occurs because our brains and our bodies are constantly taking in and assimilating information from our environment and trying to match it with our memories and our past experiences. Early experiences are remembered as a series of unconscious expectations. So if I grew up in a household where there was a lot of fighting or conflict, I might grow up believing that the world is full of conflict subconsciously and behave to reflect that. Now, trauma comes in when we have an emotional response to a distressing, life-threatening event that we're not really able to assimilate or integrate into the rest of our memories and past experiences. A lot of people refer to big T's or little T's. All that means is big traumas are things that we would naturally assume are traumatic, like abuse or a car accident or assault. And little T's are things that we might not say, hey, this was a trauma in my life, like our parent forgetting to pick us up from school one day, or somebody making fun of us. However, whether it's a big T or little t, we don't want to categorize them too much because some people can experience what we would consider little t's and it will impact them more than some people who have had big T's. It really just depends on background and the person's mentality and the situation when it was happening. There are different types of trauma. So one is direct trauma that just, it happened to me, I experienced it. One is witness trauma. I see somebody experiencing a traumatic event and I can't do anything about it. The other one would be indirect trauma. So I'm hearing people talk about their trauma, or I'm watching TV where people are explaining traumatic events that have happened to them. And then there's repeated or extreme indirect exposure. So that's going to be somebody like police officers or medical professionals or therapists who are constantly hearing repeated experiences of trauma. Another thing that we do know about trauma is that prolonged exposure to repetitive events tends to have more severe effects. So, for example, somebody who has been abused for months or years of their life, somebody who has been bullied for the majority of their life. These experiences have a bigger impact because the brain starts to believe that this is normal. A world that is painful or a world that is scary is normal. Another thing that is important to know is that neglect or absence of soothing or restorative experiences can cause people to experience trauma even if there is no other factors, especially in children. So you have children that are growing up and trying to understand the world. It's pretty scary as a child because you don't know what's happening around you. And if you don't have a parent or a caregiver that is creating some correction and soothing you after your exploratory experiences, it might create some prolonged trauma. Lastly, interpersonal violence is likely to be the most traumatic. This really affects our ability to trust other people, and it affects our ability to attach in a healthy way to other people because our brain has learned that even somebody close can be dangerous. Attachment and secure connection actually has a pretty large impact on traumatic events. So when you have a child that feels more secure in their attachments, then this meaning making and assimilating information is more flexible. Somebody that grows up in a home that's less functional, they tend to get more rigid around their belief system. It's almost like it's better to mistake a snake for a stick than to get bit. So it's better to just assume things are scary and protect yourself than to risk pain. Some people with attachment trauma will reduce their attachment needs. What that means is they'll learn to become very isolated, very protected. I don't need to rely on other people. I'm completely independent, and it feels safer to exist that way. Other people will learn to really try and keep people close, almost become over dependent on other people in order to feel safe. And it serves the same purpose. Both are to find a way to create safety in an environment that didn't feel safe. A lot of people who are seeking treatment for trauma will begin to get frustrated because they might perceive their trauma as less intense than somebody else, or they'll think, well, that person experienced a situation way worse than me. Why am I the one seeking treatment? And that's because it really is based on the experience of the person in the moment of the trauma. Severity and symptoms can change based on if the trauma was violent, if it was somebody they know, if it was repeated, or even on the mindset of the person while the trauma occurred. It also depends on the person's baseline functioning. So if a person is already pretty anxious day to day and they already believe the world is a scary place, experiencing a traumatic event can just increase that belief. At the same time, somebody who's experienced some trauma in their past might experience a trauma as an adult, and it feels like that's what they already thought the world was, so it doesn't impact them as significantly. It really is different person to person. Genetic makeup has a lot to do with it. Past experiences have a lot to do with it. So it's good to not compare your trauma with another person. There's way too many factors to try and make it seem like things are on an equal playing field. Messages received during and after the trauma also impact how the trauma is processed. So if somebody they experience a trauma, but they feel like they're in control, or they're able to be soothed, or they're able to find connection pretty quickly afterwards, it might not impact them as strongly as somebody who feels like they were not in control, or feels like they were trapped in a situation, or somebody who was asked to repeatedly talk about the trauma after it happened. Before, during, and after experiences with other people really impacts how the trauma gets processed in the long term. One thing that has been noticed is that the more helpless somebody feels in the moment, the more likely that person is to feel traumatized. A lot of trauma is this concept of I've lost power, I've lost control. And so the more control or power that you lose during the event, the more likely it is to stick with you. Now, exposure to trauma can significantly impact the way that somebody views themselves, other people, in the world. This is called our internal working model. If we grow up experiencing a lot of trauma, it's a really deep core belief that I'm powerless, or I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable. Even as an adult, it can change your internal belief about yourself that I'm not safe, or I'm not who I thought I was. It can impact the way you view other people. So other people are scary, other people aren't safe, other people are better than me. And it can impact how you view the world. So the world can go from being something that is achievable, or something I can work with, to something that is scary, something that is out of my control or chaotic. A lot of people ask what happens to our brains during a traumatic event. I'm not going to go into the biology and chemistry today, but I would like to go over just some basic concepts. Trauma really does have to do with memory. Typically, when we go through our day-to-day, we have a memory or an experience, our brain takes it in and properly stores it. Similar to a pantry. So we get home, we have our groceries, we put them away in the pantry where everything belongs, and we could take it out whenever we want to access it. With trauma, it's too much for the brain to process. It gets stored improperly in the brain and kind of freezes in the brain. It can come out when we don't want it to. It can be hard to access when we're trying to access it. It's not stored the same way other memories are stored. These memories become stuck in an emotional form instead of a story form. Typically, when you have a memory, you think about it, it doesn't bring up a lot of emotion. Sometimes you'll have nostalgia or happiness, but you'll be able to just think about the memory and go about living in the present. With the trauma, when we think about it or when it comes up unexpectedly, our bodies go into an emotional state. So either anxiety or sadness or anger will pop up because it's tied to the emotion. The memory might be long gone. It could be years and years ago, but when we think about it, our bodies act as if it's happening right now. What happens during a traumatic event, or when we're triggered later on when we're thinking about the traumatic event, is our body's sympathetic nervous system kicks in. The sympathetic nervous system is designed to give us energy and to help us either fight the threat or flight, run away from the threat. Many people have heard of fight or flight response. Some other things that could happen with fight or flight is freeze. Another one that has come up recently is submit. So similar to if we were to see a bear, our body would give us all this extra energy, our heart would start racing, we'd kind of get hot, other parts of the body like digestion system would slow down, the logical part of our brain tends to turn off. That way our body can just react quick. We can fight the bear, which most people won't do, or we can flight, run away. A lot of people's bodies, however, go into a freeze response. That means kind of like a lizard. Something scary happens and you just freeze. And when that happens, a lot of trauma gets stored improperly because you kind of lose the ability to protect yourself. The submit response we notice with people that have experienced prolonged trauma or abusive relationships, for example, where they learn if I just submit and I just say, okay, whatever you want, then I will avoid the pain or avoid the danger. And that happening over and over will cause a person to continue that pattern. Now that we've gone over some of the basic concepts of trauma, let's explore symptoms of trauma. First symptom is hypervigilance. This is really the idea that your body is constantly scanning for a threat. It's the brain's way to prevent the trauma from happening again. I'm going to constantly be looking for whatever the perceived threat is. If my perceived threat or my trauma occurs around rejection, I'm constantly going to be monitoring relationships for perceived rejection. And when I think I'm being rejected, I might get intensely responsive as opposed to just maybe saying like, is something happening with this person where they're rejecting me? I might go into yelling or asking a lot of questions or trying to draw them closer to me. If I have been in a car accident and I'm driving, I might be constantly jumpy if I notice a car pull out of the store or somebody's tapping their brakes in front of me. It might make me have an intense reaction where a normal reaction would be just to kind of slow down or to monitor. Another symptom is avoidance. This is the idea of avoiding anything that might remind me of the event. So if I had some sort of trauma in a crowd, then I might avoid anywhere where there might be crowds, like a concert or a store. If I had trauma in an interpersonal relationship, then I might avoid getting into another relationship and be pretty picky about who I choose to have in my life. This happens because the brain has not registered specifically what about the event was dangerous. It just takes in everything from that traumatic experience and marks it as a danger in our heads. Another one is flashbacks or intrusive thoughts. People sometimes get confused about what a flashback is. Really, it's experiencing the memory again. It's my body reacting as if I'm in the moment from the past and not being present. Intrusive thoughts are constantly thinking about the memory, having constant repeated dreams about the memory. These are all the brain's way of trying to process events because it's unprocessed, it's unsettled, and your brain is trying to process through it, but it's not working correctly. And then there's dissociation. Dissociation is the brain's way of protecting you from having any more psychological harm. Dissociation feels a bit like you're walking in a dream state or you're kind of disconnected from reality or you are feeling numb to your emotions. It's really a way for you not to exist in the present. These aren't all the symptoms of trauma, but they're some of the more significant or common ones. And it's important to know that you don't have to have checked all of the symptoms in order to have experienced trauma. Sometimes you'll just have one or two of the symptoms. Some people ask if I've experienced trauma, does that mean that I have a mental health disorder? Not necessarily. However, it is more likely that people with trauma will obtain a mental health disorder. Many people with depression, anxiety disorders, chemical dependency, ADHD, they can identify an experience in their past that's directly linked to some of the symptoms they're experiencing with their mental health. One part of trauma that often gets overlooked is trauma in the body. A big resource for this is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It really dives into depth some of the studies that they've done to show how trauma is stored in the body. What does it mean to have trauma stored in the body? That can mean a lot of different things. A lot of people refer to it as just different areas of tension. A lot of people refer to it as the emotions that you feel in your body and how they're tied to trauma. It really just means that our bodies are physically reacting to the traumatic event that is no longer happening right now. During EMDR, it's a trauma type of trauma therapy that I'll go over here in a bit, but during EMDR, people will recognize physical sensations. So as they're going through the process of working through this trauma, they'll feel different feelings throughout their body that's replaying itself. Our bodies can hold tension that's impacted by trauma. So as somebody that's experienced repeated trauma, they might feel a lot of tension in their shoulders because they're hunching and they're kind of cowering down a lot and creating a protective stance. And that creates tension in the neck, in the back. Another thing that people might feel with trauma is tension in their chest because they're standing up and they're making sure to kind of have a more aggressive or prepared stance for the world. People can also hold trauma in the body as it's related to the trauma that occurred. For example, sexual trauma might store in the hips or in the thighs and the legs, sensations in our bodies that might be tense because of what occurred. People that have been in a fight, they might have, if you've been hit, you might have trauma or a feeling just kind of on this side of your body. You'll notice it's different for everybody, but as you go through the process, it's good to scan your body and look for where there might be unresolved tension. Awareness of our body's reactions to trauma can really help us process through it instead of just focusing on the thoughts or the memories. Another question I get asked a lot is, if I've experienced trauma, does that mean I have PTSD? Not necessarily. PTSD is a disorder that's defined as re-experiencing the memory over and over. So whether that's dreams, intrusive thoughts, flashbacks. It's also characterized by extreme avoidance of whatever it was that caused this trauma. It creates some negative beliefs, negative connections and mood. It creates that hyperarousal or that hypervigilance, so kind of constantly feeling this anxiety or on edge. It has quite a few symptoms that we've talked about today, but PTSD is more severe. Some people can have trauma and have trauma responses without fully being diagnosed with PTSD. So how do we treat trauma? There's a ton of different modalities. All of them are pretty impactful. Step one to treating trauma is recognizing that it's a grieving process. So at some point, you've lost a sense of safety, and you have to grieve that sense of safety. You've lost a person, or you've lost a belief about yourself or others. And the grief process is important to understand because a lot of people will be feeling intense sadness or anger or denial, and they don't understand what's happening to them. But recognizing that their body's just trying to process a new reality. It's trying to take you from what you believed yourself and the world were before to what is the new world with this new information of danger assimilated into it. One of the most important factors for the grief process is time. Letting your body feel and go through the motions, talking about what you've lost with people will help to process, but it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's something that takes some time to experience. Another way to try and recover from trauma is focus on empowerment. Because people that have experienced traumatic events often are left feeling powerless or they've lost a sense of power, regaining power is really helpful to living in the present. I've been taught a ton of different ways to empower oneself, but an easy trick is to think about the word SPIRE. That's not a word, it's an acronym, but SPIRE, S means spiritually. Where can I feel more powerful spiritually? Whether that's connecting with a God, whether that's being more present with the universe, whatever that means to you, but finding a way to feel powerful in that. P is physically, feeling more powerful physically, whether that's taking self-defense classes, whether that's exercising, whether that's just learning how to calm within your body and meditate. Different things help you feel more powerful within your own body. I is intellectually. What can I do to learn more about my body, learn more about the world around me? What makes me feel powerful intellectually, even if it's not related to the trauma, it's just finding a way to build that power. R is relationally. How can I feel more powerful in my relationships? Can I set firmer boundaries with people? Can I learn how to let people in? Can I have healthy connections? Whatever it takes to make you feel powerful within your relationships. And last, E is emotionally. How can I feel more powerful over my emotions? The best thing I would recommend is learning how to feel your emotions, learning how to listen and work with your emotions, learning coping skills to manage intense emotions, but different things that make you feel powerful within your emotions. Self-regulating in the present is another way to really help with that trauma treatment. Trauma brings us to the past. It tells us that we're no longer in the present day and we're back in that moment, that scary or threatening moment. Typically, our body will either shut down or it will amp up. If it's amping up, relaxation techniques are super helpful. Letting your body know that it's safe by slowly breathing, calming your body down, meditating, relaxing. A good trick I like to teach people is to breathe out slowly. A lot of times people will do the opposite. When you're told to take a deep breath, they're like, and that kind of does the opposite, unfortunately. It can turn the sympathetic nervous system back up if you're breathing in deeper than out. In order to calm it back down and turn the parasympathetic system on, you want to take a breath in, slowly let it out. And what that does after a few breaths, it'll tell your body that it's okay to be calm. A lot of people that have experienced trauma will say that breathing techniques do not work for them. And there is some truth to that. Unfortunately, sometimes the breath and the heart rate variability will be off for people that have experienced trauma, and it might feel like I'm choking if I'm trying to take deep breaths. It just takes some practice and time and patience to get that body reconnected. Another thing to self-regulate in the present is mindfulness. Mindfulness is a buzzword. A lot of people use it, but really what that means is being present. In order to be present in my current surroundings, I can use my five, my taste, my hearing, my sight, my smell, my touch, my five senses, and bring me back to the reality. What am I smelling right now? What does the air feel like on my skin? What do I see? What details or colors can I pick out? What can I hear? Do I hear the air conditioning? Do I hear birds? What can I feel? What can I taste? If I am using my five senses, I'm becoming very focused on what's happening right now, and it's getting my body out of that past moment. Another thing for self-regulation is self-talk. As you've done your work on trauma, you'll kind of recognize when it's coming up and what your body is telling you. If you know that my trauma occurred because of this event, then when your body reacts, you'll self-talk and say, hey, that event's not happening right now. It's okay to be safe. This feeling is just the feeling from the past. My body is just amping up in order to give me energy, but I don't need it right now. You're just kind of talking to yourself to let yourself know that what's happening makes sense because of the trauma, and you don't need your body to react, and you can kind of help it to calm back down. Another important piece is connection. Connection is really helpful for trauma because we're learning how to be safe in relationship again. We're learning how to exist with people and share space and feel okay and not be scared of those relationships. Connection does not mean talking about the trauma. It can help to talk about trauma for sure, but you don't have to tell it to everyone you meet in order for you to feel connected to people and to feel better. If you're having a trauma response and your body's amping up, go sit with a friend. Just sit and experience and feel connected, and help your body feel safe through relationships. If you're able to share your feelings free of judgment, then it really helps process a little bit deeper, saying, hey, I have this feeling that I'm anxious right now, or something's coming up. Can I just sit with you? And the person is receptive to that. It will really help your body calm down. Another thing is hearing from people with similar experiences. So doing some sort of group therapy can be helpful because it makes you feel a little bit less alone. It helps your brain and body to recognize that what's happening is normal and it makes sense. And hearing other people's recovery process can help give some hope that it can get better. Another important aspect is physical healing. We talked a bit about trauma in the body, and there's a lot of ways to help release some of the trauma that's stored in the body. One very popular one is yoga. Yoga, even Tai Chi, is something where you're breathing and you're moving. You're matching your breath to movement, you're creating rhythm. It helps you to kind of slow down, be within your body, be comfortable in your body again, or even learn how to trust your body again. And can also release some of that tension. So if you know that I'm having some tension in my hips, you can do some hip releasers to help release some of that tension. Some people have noticed that when they try yoga for the first or second time, or even the 100th time, and they're releasing some trauma, they'll feel heavy emotions and even start crying during the process. And that's okay. That's just part of the release that your body's needing. Another one is massage therapy. Massage therapy is a great way to release that fascia, release any areas of tension that your body's physically holding. It can help you be more aware of where that tension lies. Meditation is good. It helps you be within your body, be calm. Meditation does not mean sitting silently and thinking of nothing. It can mean sitting and letting your thoughts float and just noticing them. It can mean walking and noticing the area around you, having a mindfulness walk. Anything where you're able to really be present and just be accepting of the thoughts, the experiences that you're having right now. Body awareness exercises, so anything like a progressive relaxation where you're calming from the top of your head to the tip of your toes, you're tensing and then you're releasing. It helps you really gather information about your body, feel your body again. A lot of people that have experienced trauma, they just don't feel in their body anymore. They've detached from it, and becoming aware of your body can help you notice where it's stored. And then lastly is heart rate variability. I won't get too in depth in this today. There's a lot of information about heart rate variability that would be helpful to research. But basically, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, your heartbeat should kind of go through cycles throughout the day of like getting quicker, calming down, and it really should match your breath. People with trauma, their heart rate variability is a bit off. It doesn't necessarily match their breath, and it's not at healthy levels. The last thing I'll talk about today is different therapeutic approaches to treating trauma. I do recommend that most people that believe that they've experienced some sort of trauma go and seek professional help. It can help the process move along quicker. It can help you feel like you're not alone. And there are many different types of therapists that you can search for. One is CBT, trauma-focused CBT. CBT means cognitive behavioral therapy, and that just means that I'm going to notice how my thoughts impact my body, how those two things are connected. If I can change my cognitions and my thoughts, then I might be able to change the way my body is reacting to them. EMDR is a very popular one for trauma treatment. It means eye movement desensitization reprocessing. I won't get too into depth, but basically you're trying to stimulate both sides of your brain, whether it's with these eye movements or buzzers or a light bar or with noises or tapping. There's all kinds of different ways, but you're stimulating both sides of your brain and bringing up the trauma, talking about what's happening to you, and letting your brain reprocess and unfreeze whatever's in there. Narrative therapy is another popular one. This is just the process of writing out and telling your traumatic event as if it's a story, and then you go through a series of ways to do that with your therapist. Internal family systems is another one that you'll hear, and that goes into depth about different parts of you. So you might have your the part of you that is protecting you from experiencing the trauma again, the part of you that is reacting whenever you have a trigger come up, the part of you that wants to heal. Your therapist will walk you through all the different parts, what they mean, how to work with them, and try to get them kind of integrated. Then you have somatic experiencing. That is really focused on bodily sensations. You have exposure therapy. That's just overcoming fear. For example, if you have trauma with spiders, it would be looking at a picture of a spider, thinking about a spider, then leveling up to holding a spider maybe. That one's not as popular, but there are ways to overcome trauma just by allowing yourself to face some of the fears that are more reasonable to face. Another one's inner child work. Inner child is something that a lot of people hear about. It just means that the younger version of you that experienced trauma or didn't have his or her needs met will kind of stick with you and will speak up whenever something is occurring and it's trying to get its needs met again. I think that can be pretty powerful if you're able to access your inner child and do some of the healing. There's quite a few more, but those are the main ones that you'll notice. So that concludes our quick talk about trauma today. I went over quite a bit of information. I will leave some resources below if you want to expand further. I also plan to make some more videos in the future with some more detailed information about a lot of the things I went over today. All right, bye.